In 1520, Spanish conquistadors had the night of their life in Mexico as they were brutally butchered by the Aztecs who had finally had enough of their unwanted presence. The Spanish, under the command of Hernan Cortes, who was one of the richest men in the New World at this point, hadn't been the most welcome guests into the Aztec grand capital of Tenochtitlan ever since their arrival in late 1519. They had taken the Aztec Emperor Montezuma II captive and used him as a puppet ruler. They had forced the Aztecs to install Christian imagery on top of their temples alongside the Aztec idols, and their insatiable lust for gold was ever growing. Tensions were beginning to rise for Cortes, not just inside the city, but from his own countrymen as well. In April 1520, a Spanish force of roughly 800 conquistadors arrived on the coast roughly 250 miles away from the Spanish capital with a hefty arsenal to boot. However, they weren't there to reinforce Cortes, they were there to capture or kill him. Cortes had disobeyed the governor of Cuba, who had removed him as captain of the expedition to discover the Aztecs just before it left, over fears of Cortes being disloyal and taking the riches for himself. But the messenger sent to Cortes to tell him this news was murdered by Cortes' brother, and he set off anyway, with his open defiance against his superior now catching up to him. Cortes hastily assembled a crew of roughly 250 conquistadors to deal with this new threat, leaving behind a skeleton crew of roughly only 100 troops in Tenochtitlan to take care of the situation and keep the emperor captive, as he reinforced his crew with roughly 200 natives along the way. The newly arrived conquistadors were stationed in the coastal city of Chempaula, which they had captured and made their base of operations. However, on one thunderous night, Cortes took them all by surprise, captured their cavalry, captured their artillery, forced them into a retreat, and then captured their commander in a role reversal of what he was meant to do to Cortes. The fighting was half-hearted, with less than 20 mortally injured, as in negotiations prior, Cortes had promised the fresh-faced New World recruits riches beyond their wildest dreams if they joined him in Tenochtitlan. As well as them being less than fond of their now captured commander, it didn't take long for them to join Cortes' ranks. Cortes set his way back to the capital now, boasting a force of over 1,200 troops, which was more than double than what he arrived with last year, with fresh supplies, heavy cavalry, heavy artillery, rifles, 2,000 more of his native allies, and he would soon need them all as events were beginning to kick off in Tenochtitlan. Pedro de Alvarado, the man Cortes left in charge at Tenochtitlan, was a fiery hothead, and under his command, the Spanish brutally butchered many unarmed Aztecs during a religious festival, as the locals saw firsthand their first taste of the horrors that Spanish steel could unleash. Alvarado's motivations for such a brutal act of violence are up for debate, with Spanish sources saying that the Aztecs, there was a conspiracy between them that they would kill the Spanish and then cook them with garlic, with the Spanish acting first in a planned act of violence. Other accounts say he was enchanted by the Aztec gold they were wearing during this festival and he wanted it for himself. Others saying that paranoia got the best of him, but whatever the case now, every Aztec was gagging to get their hands on a bit of Spanish flesh. Cortes returned to the city peacefully within the next few days. However, the day after he arrived, the Spanish compound was laid siege to, their water was cut off, their fresh food was cut off, and all the bridges out of the city were cut, and they were now surrounded as they played their last throw of the dice in order to exit the city peacefully. They forced Montezuma to speak to the angry crowds to let the Spanish leave without harm, and then they will return all the gold. However, he was jeered and pelted with missiles and forced to withdraw, as the Aztecs had already elected a new emperor, with Montezuma powerless. It was around some point at this time that Montezuma was killed, with the Aztecs claiming that the Spanish killed him after they found he was no more use to them, and the Spanish claiming that the Aztecs actually killed him with the missiles they pelted at him during his big speech. However, Cortes now knew he had to make a hurried exit out of the city, with many Spanish being overburdened by all the gold they had stolen, as they decided to go west, using makeshift bridges to get out of the city during one thunderous stormy night. However, they were soon spotted as the passage they thought was unguarded actually wasn't, and the Aztecs now rocked up on their canoes, and the Spanish had to fight their way out or face death, with many of the Spanish actually drowning in the lake, being overburdened by the gold they were carrying. However, that was a far more favourable death than those who were captured. The aim of the game for the Aztecs was to capture as many people during battle to be used as religious sacrifices. However, those fleeing that night would be seen as cowards and not warrior captives. They were to be dragged up the Great Temple steps, likely not given hallucinogenic mushrooms due to their cowardice to mask the pain, as the obsidian blade tore their chest apart and their heart ripped out, with their body thrown down the temple steps to make a tasty dinner. Cortez escaped, however he broke down in tears realising the depravity of the situation, as he had lost roughly 600 Spanish conquistadors and a few thousand more of his native allies. The night came to be known as La Noche Triste, or the Sorrowful Night. However, it was seemingly the Spanish who had struck the fatal blow in their conquest of the Americas, as the men who had reinforced Cortez into the city had brought smallpox into it.